pick up tonight where we left off last time in Ruth chapter 3. We are still going through, just so you know, we're still going through the promises of God and finding from book to book the promises of God, looking at the promises that He made and going to find their fulfillment so that we can gain more and more trust in what God has to tell us. And we got to the book of Judges and I got depressed. So we had to go find something happy in the book. And in the period of the book of Judges, we have this story of Ruth, this event of Ruth that takes place. Ruth and Boaz, who's the Jew, Ruth a Moabite, a Gentile. And so we have been going through for the past few weeks the book of Ruth. We're in Ruth chapter 3. We'll probably finish it next Sunday, but I'm kind of milking it because I like the joy of the story. I just like the joy of the obedience to the Lord, the blessings. It's a whole different story from first hour this morning, isn't it? So we'll pick up in Ruth chapter 3, verse 6. It says, "So she, Ruth, went down to the threshing floor and did according to all that her mother-in-law Naomi had commanded her." Remember, Naomi is playing matchmaker here, finds out that Ruth was sent by Yahweh to Boaz's field, and when Ruth realizes whose field she was in, she starts into the great Jewish matchmaker role, which was normal in the day because marriages were arranged by parents. So Naomi hatches this plan. Ruth is following through with the plan. She goes to the threshing floor where Boaz will be. In verse 7 it says, "When Boaz had eaten and drunk and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain, and she came secretly, uncovered his feet, and lay down." He had laid right next to his grain, as we talked about last time, to protect it. Naomi knew this is what he would do. And so Naomi sent Ruth in the dark of night under a large cloak to cover her identity. And secretly, as Boaz was sleeping, Ruth approached him, uncovered his feet, literally uncovered his feet. We're not talking about anything, any sexual connotation here, and awaited for the man to wake up. She laid down beside him. In verse 8, it happened in the middle of the night that the man was startled, and he bent forward, and behold, a woman was lying at his feet. And he said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your maid. So spread your covering over your maid, for you are a close relative." Remember this idea of spread your covering, where Boaz blesses Ruth for having come back to Israel, or come to Israel, seeking the covering for the Lord to cover her with His wings of protection. And now Ruth tells Boaz, "You be the answer to my prayer, or to your own prayer. You be the one that the Lord uses to cover and protect me." And that's exactly what she's using. The exact same words he used for her earlier, she uses to him. Spread your covering, your wings, your kanafim over your maid, for you are a close relative. We talked about the kinsman redeemer, the fact that a family member could redeem family land and the family name. That's what's at stake here. We just don't need to talk about it again. We already have. In verse 10 it says, "Then he said," his response to her was, "May you be blessed of the Lord, my daughter." Remember, my daughter, indicating their age difference. They're at least a generation apart. I'm thinking 25 to 30 year difference in the man Boaz and Ruth. He says, "May you be blessed of the Lord, my daughter. You have shown your last kindness to be better than the first, by not going after young men, whether poor or rich." Remember that Boaz knew he was first, I won't say attracted to in a physical sense, but he recognized right away when he came into his field that this young woman is not one of the normal women that gleans in my field. He was very clearly, he very clearly took notice of her. And here he says, in saying this last kindness, that you would marry me, an old man, and continuing your commitment to your deceased husband Mahlon by seeking a close family member to redeem his land and property and to continue his name, that you would continue the commitment you made to that man in marriage, is wonderful. He calls her excellent in just the next verse here. But Boaz knows she could have found a suitable husband, a young, suitable Jewish man that would have married her. Remember, especially in the age, the times of the judges in which this occurred, the Jewish men had no problem marrying Gentiles. And so Ruth would have been attractive to the Jewish boys in Bethlehem. But she didn't do that. Her commitment to her husband, her commitment to the Mosaic law, when Naomi told her, this man is a close relative, I'm sure we don't have it printed, but I'm sure Naomi explained to her the Levirate law of marriage, the Mosaic law that a brother or a relative can marry us, keep the land in the family name, etc. She would have understood these things, and she was committed not only to her deceased husband Mahlon, but also to keep the family name of her father-in-law Elimelech going. So that's what's going on in this story. Boaz thinks, you're a wonderful woman for having done this. You showing kindness to me is even more incredible than you showing kindness to your mother-in-law Naomi by leaving your land of Moab and coming into Israel to look for covering from her God Yahweh. Verse 11 says, now my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you whatever you ask. For all my people in the city, literally this means all the people at the gate. That's what he says to her. For all the people at the gate know that you are a woman of excellence. Remember last time we talked about that word excellence, meaning it's the word Hayil, H-A-Y-I-L, Hayil, and it means power or strength, valor. All these are strength and military type words. Power, strength, valor, might, competence, efficiency, and high value. He's rating her and describing her as a woman that's very, very capable. An excellent woman of high moral standard, of high moral character. Strength of soul more than strength of arms is what we're dealing with here. He says, all my people, all the people in the city, all my people in the city. I say that means all the people at the gate. Remember in these ancient Jewish cities, the gate is where, the city gate is where business was transacted. It's where contracts were drawn. It's where the judges or the counselors of the city would hang out at the gate. People would come to the gate of the city to hear to give their complaints and to hear the judgments of the judges. So what Boaz is saying here is that Ruth's reputation among the influential people in the city is that of being excellent, morally pure, of high moral character. So he tells her, because of your reputation, I know that you will keep your end of this bargain. If you are presenting yourself to me as a close relative, and you're asking me to follow through with the Mosaic law provision of levirate marriage, you want me to marry you, buy the land and take over your family's name, then I will do it. And I know because of your excellent character, your high moral character, that you will keep your end of the bargain. It's interesting, this word that's used, excellence, Hayil, translated excellent here, you are a woman of excellence. It's interesting because look at this verse. In Ruth chapter 2 verse 1, it's Boaz that is being described. And I don't know if you can find it from what you're reading there in the English, but the exact same word is used to describe Boaz. He tells Ruth, you are a woman of excellence. And the writer said the same thing about him. It says, now Naomi had a kinsman of her husband, a man of great wealth of the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. The word wealth is translated here wealth. It's the exact same word Hayil. I don't know why in one it's translated wealth and why in the other it's translated excellent, but it's the exact same word. Hayil, speaking of the fact of moral character, of high moral character. Remember, I moved this around a little when we were here. I said he is a great man of wealth. It's not talking about his excellence or his wealth. Yes, it's talking about money also, but it's not saying he's an exceedingly wealthy man. He's a man of great volumes of wealth. That's not how it's written in the Hebrew. It says he is a great man, a Gibor Ish Gibor. He is a great man who happens to be wealthy. And we know now this word ties to what it says about Ruth, that he is a man of excellent character, high moral character, a man of great stature, a man of great power, a man of great importance, because he is a man that has a reputation of being one of high moral character. Remember what we're talking about. We're talking about the period of the judges. The same people we talked about this morning in the city of Gibeah of Benjamin. The same city with the men who banged on the door and are calling out for the man who's come the Levite to be given to them so that they can rape the man all night in this homosexual act. We're talking about those days in Israel. It's that time period when you have a man like Boaz of high moral character and a Gentile woman like Ruth of equal high moral character. It doesn't matter what the society's doing around us. We can live as Ruths, and we can live as the man Boaz did. You don't have to succumb to what society is dragging you down to. You can rise above your culture and live like these people. So Boaz says, because of Ruth's reputation, I know, Ruth, that you can keep your end of the deal. And now Boaz is telling Ruth, because of my reputation, you don't have to fear, my daughter. I will keep my end of the bargain. You can be sure that I understand what you're offering, and I will see to it that this happens. But is he free to marry Ruth? Or is there a problem? As we'll see in just a minute, there is a problem. There's a hitch in the plan that Boaz is about to have to deal with. In verse 12, this is what it says. We have to ask the question, how would two spiritually powerful and competent people, a man and a woman of noble character, handle this particular hitch? Their character is on trial here in verse 12. Boaz says to Ruth, "It is true, I am a close relative. However, there's a relative closer than I." So Boaz is explaining to her that I have done some homework. And I have traced down our lineage and looked into our family tree. I guess in preparation or maybe a wishful thinking that maybe this could possibly happen, knowing who Ruth is, who Naomi is, that he could be the kinsman redeemer. It seems that Boaz has done some homework and knows now that there is a relative that stands before him in his biological attachment to Elimelech and Mahlon. So there's a man that has the legal right in Israel to go first. Did he have to bring that up? Do you think that other man would have chased this down? I kind of doubt it. But here is a man of honor knowing there's a closer relative, so he's going to see that relative is dealt with fairly. Look what he says in verse 13. We'll get to that in just a minute. The story continues, his conversation with Ruth. Remain this night. Now, what's he asking her to do? Remember where we're talking about. We're talking about Israel during the period of the judges. Remember what we talked about in the first hour this morning and what was going on with the Levites in Judges chapter 19. He's protecting her. He's physically covering her exactly as she just asked him to. He is protecting Ruth. Instead of sending her out into the streets of Bethlehem, which was in Benjamin, northern Judah, Benjamin, the area where these atrocities were taking place, instead of sending her out in the dark to find her way home, he protects her and says, "You stay here under my protective wing." He's immediately answering part of her request. Stay the night until the morning has dawned. So he says in verse 13, remain this night. And when morning comes, if he will redeem you, that closer relative, if he will redeem you, good. Let him redeem you. He has the legal right. You want to do this according to the Mosaic law? I agree. What a wonderful woman you are to suggest this. Really, what a wonderful woman Naomi is to suggest this. Boaz knows who started this ball rolling down the hill. It's the mother-in-law. This is an arranged event, and he knows it. So if he will redeem you, you want to do this according to the law? We will do it properly according to the law. Exactly according to the Mosaic law. But if he says, but if he does not wish to redeem you, then I will redeem you. As the Lord lives, he makes a vow to her, I will redeem you if he refuses, as the Lord lives. Calls on the name of Yahweh to vow his commitment to her, I will be your kinsman redeemer, but I need to check with our relative first. So he tells her again, lie down until morning. So this spiritually and morally pure man, Boaz, is also protecting the family member's right to redeem Mahlon's land for himself. Mahlon being the deceased husband of Ruth. He's not only protecting Ruth by saying, you lie down and stay here until it's light out because the streets are dangerous. He's not only protecting her physically, he's also protecting a family member who hasn't presented himself, hasn't come forward and said, I have a right to redeem, hasn't done anything. But Boaz, because he's an honorable man, is protecting the family member's right to the land first. So Boaz here vows to Ruth, I will redeem you as the Lord lives, he says. He vows to Ruth that he will see this through as the Lord lives. Boaz desires to marry this young woman, Ruth. He wants to be her kinsman redeemer. He wants to redeem her husband's family name and her father-in-law's family land. He desires that. She's a woman of excellence. Who wouldn't desire that? And so Ruth, being a responsive woman, doesn't say, no, I'll be okay. I'm going to go home. I need to get home. Naomi's going to be worried. She listens to the man. She responds to his safe warnings, and she does exactly what he asks her to do. What a wonderful wife already, not even married. Verse 14 says, so she lay at his feet until morning. Nothing happened on this night except for what we read. She lay at his feet until morning and rose before one could recognize another. And this is what he said before she left. Let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. Boaz is talking to Ruth. I protected you last night from physical danger in the city, and now I'm protecting you from the town's gossips, who most often get facts wrong, but that doesn't bother them. They talk anyway. And to protect the honor of this woman so nobody would talk about, well, you should know what I see. Last night I saw Ruth with Boaz and blah, 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 and she stayed all night, didn't leave until the morning. Boaz is protecting her reputation as a woman of character. So he says, don't let anybody know, let it not be known that you came here. Verse 15, again he said, give me the cloak. Remember earlier, I think the word was when Naomi said, put on your finest clothes and anoint yourself. And I said, it's a bad translation. It's not finest clothes. She's telling her to put on a cloak. This is a secret mission to go to Boaz. And here we have the word properly interpreted as cloak. It's a large robe, a large covering, like covering yourself with a bed sheet or a blanket. So he says, give me the cloak that is on you and hold it. So imagine she's not wearing the cloak, she's holding it out like this so that he can empty into it some barley. So she held it, and he measured 6 measures of barley and laid it on her. and then she went into the city. Could have been this 6 measures of barley could have been as much as 60 pounds of barley that he gave her. Now, who is he really giving the barley? Who is he rewarding here? Remember what I've told you, that in this day and age in Israel, marriages were arranged by mom and dad. Who is he sending the barley to? Who is the reward for the reward of the barley? It's for Naomi. It's for Naomi. Look what it says in verse 16. When she came to her mother-in-law, she said, Naomi, how did it go, my daughter? And she told her all that the man had done for her. And she said, Ruth tells her mother-in-law, Naomi, these 6 measures of barley he gave to me. Why? There's a reason why. For he said, do not go to your mother-in-law empty-handed. The reward was for the matchmaker. It wasn't payment. It was appreciation, and it was provision. You need food. You need barley. I've given you much more than you need. You can sell the excess. And that's what he's doing. Boaz not only is caring for Ruth, he protected her this night. He protected her physically. He protected her reputation by saying, don't let anybody know. He's also providing for her mother-in-law, Naomi. What a man. In the period of Israel known by the book of Judges. When things are horrific here spiritually and morally, look at what you can still be. Because arranged marriages, again, were the order of the day in Israel. Boaz knew that it was Naomi who was playing matchmaker here. It was Naomi who sent Ruth to the threshing floor that night. He understands it, so he rewards her faithfulness to Yahweh. We're talking about faithfulness to her husband, Elimelech, faithfulness to levirate marriage, faithfulness to the Mosaic law, faithfulness to the desire of Yahweh that family land be kept in the family name. I showed you concerning the feast of Jubilee that was the biggest part of the feast. The land would go back to its original family ownership by the words of Yahweh himself. And so Naomi understands these things, and she's willing to play by the rules of the Mosaic law. And Boaz, another keeper of the Mosaic law, loves her for this, respects her for this, rewards her for this, with 6 measures of barley on this night. Imagine the sheer joy in Naomi's heart as she's hearing all these things from Ruth. I mean, all she did was play matchmaker for a man that she really didn't know well, Boaz. She's been away for 10 years. Remember that fact too. Naomi and her family had been away from Bethlehem for 10 years. A lot can change in 10 years. Maybe Boaz isn't the man he used to be. So she's rolling the dice here. But imagine her sheer joy as she's hearing these words from her beloved daughter-in-law of all that Boaz has said, all that he's done. He's sent this barley back for his mother. Imagine how happy she was, leaping for joy in her turn of circumstances that Yahweh has brought about in her life. Remember, for Naomi, it wasn't very long before this, wasn't long at all, that she walked into the city after being gone for 10 years. And the women of the city said, could this be you, Naomi? Is it you? And remember what she told him? Do not call me Naomi, which means pleasant or gracious one. Do not call me Naomi anymore, for the Lord has dealt bitterly with me. Call me Mara. Call me bitter. Because that's the way the Lord had treated her. In her eyes, not knowing what God was moving around. Imagine her joy starting to come to understand just exactly what it was that Yahweh was doing all that time. Here she is now, in line to be redeemed. This will be Naomi's day of redemption. Because whether Boaz agrees to marry Ruth or whether the close relative agrees to marry Ruth, either way, the family name that she married into will continue in the land of Israel. And so she will be redeemed by her kinsmen, just the way the law says it should work. She's living through circumstances of blessing that the Lord is bringing to her. I can't imagine how happy she was. She thought all was lost. God is showing her now all is found. I did all those other things to bring you to this spot. Verse 18. It says, then she said, wait, my daughter. Naomi, understanding that everything is in Boaz's lap now, the ball is in his court. She says, wait, my daughter, until you know how the matter turns out. Whose husband will you be? One or the other. Ruth's getting married. Wonderful, joyous event. Wait, my daughter, until you know how the matter turns out. For the man Boaz will not rest until he has settled it today. She knows a man of character like this isn't going to wait around on this. He's going to figure this out immediately. Why is Naomi so sure of this? Why is she so sure that Boaz will act immediately? It's because of his reputation as an excellent man. His reputation as a man of high character. He understands that Ruth wants the answer to this. Naomi needs the answer to this. He would not waste time. He would move eventually. Again, whether Ruth marries the close relative or whether she marries Boaz, to Naomi, it really doesn't matter because she will have a kinsman redeemer on this day. A wonderful truth. Ruth chapter 4 starts this way. Now Boaz went up to the gate. He tells Ruth, I will handle this matter right now. So he goes up to the gate the same day and he sat down. Remember, the gate is where the judges are. It's where the influential men of the city are. It's where the city council is, if you will. It's where the elders are, the wise men. This is where they hang out in the city gates. And so that's where Boaz went. He went to the gate and he sat down there, the gate of Bethlehem, and behold, the close relative. Isn't it interesting that just by happenstance, as if God's not involved here, the very moment Boaz goes and needs to speak to this close relative, of all men to walk by, who does the Lord send by? The right guy. Of all fields to happen to wander into, whose field does Ruth wander into to glean? The kinsman redeemer Boaz, the great one. So Boaz walks up to the gate. He sat down there. And behold, the close relative of whom Boaz spoke was passing by. I love the way the Lord moves situations and circumstances around. So Boaz says to him, turn aside, my friend, sit down here. Interesting that this man is never named. Boaz is named, Mahlon is named, Chilion is named, Elimelech is named, Naomi is named, Ruth is named. I wonder if the Lord kept this man's name out because he refused to be Ruth's kinsman redeemer. It was his right, it was his responsibility, but this man refused. Boaz goes down in history as one of the great examples of obedience in the Scripture. This man disappears from human history. He had his chance, oh so close, to do the right thing and imagine your name being written in the Scriptures of God. Not this guy. He calls him my friend. Turn aside, friend, sit down here. And he turned aside and he sat down. He will remain unnamed throughout the story. And verse 2 says, he took 10 men of the elders. So Boaz is gathering his council, 10 men. He took 10 men of the elders of the city and he said, sit down here. And so they sat down. Incidentally, this 10 men, I don't know if you know this, but in Judaism for centuries, for you to be able to erect a synagogue in your town, in your village, you had to have at least 10 Jewish males. And this is one of the verses where you get that information, where that idea is based on. There's another couple, I've just read them, so I got to tell you at least one more. There's another idea of the 10 men being available, or being available and present. In Noah's Ark's situation, this is a rabbinic tradition. In Noah's Ark situation, how many people were on the boat? 8 humans, 1 God. Only if they were 10. Maybe it would have, this is the rabbinic thought, that if you can get to 10, you can solve problems and you can worship God properly. If only there were 10, maybe more would have gotten on the boat, as they're thinking. It's kind of strange, but 10 ends up being a number to them. You have to have 10 men. As a matter of fact, even today in synagogue, if you don't have 10 men present, most of the prayers of the congregation cannot be prayed. You can't pray certain prayers. You can't bar mitzvah a boy. You can't say certain of the marriage ceremony prayers. You can't do a lot of things in Israel if 10 men aren't present. And you wonder, where did you get this 10 men rule from, you legalistic rabbis? Well, part of it is right here in Ruth chapter 4, when the great man Boaz gathers 10 men. Just incidental, just an aside, I thought it was interesting. He took 10 men of the elders of the city and he said, sit down here. And so they sat down. And Boaz is a brilliant man. And listen to the way he starts to lay out this situation with the close relative. He said to the close relative, now he's got 10 men as witnesses that will decide this and be able to say, no, this is exactly how it occurred. Boaz made the offer, the man refused. He's got 10 men. Interesting that the women started all of this, but now in this male-dominated world of Israel, during the period of the book of Judges, the women are excluded, Naomi and Ruth, and this is something, their lives are about to be decided by 10 men. But be that as it may, that's the situation they were in. That was their culture. So he says to the closest relative, Naomi, who has come back from the land of Moab, has to sell the piece of land which belonged to our brother, our kin, our family member, Elimelech. Whose name is missing in this? He says, Naomi, who has come back from the land of Moab. Did she come alone? Whose name is missing? Ruth. Naomi, who has come back from the land of Moab, has a piece of land to sell, which belonged to our brother Elimelech. Now, let me ask you a question. Is Elimelech dead? Yes, he died in the land of Moab. So when the father dies, who does the land go to? How does inheritance work? Who does it go to? It goes to his sons. Ruth was married to one of those boys, Mahlon. It's not only Naomi that has a piece of land to sell, it's Ruth that also has a right to the land that her husband owned. But it's interesting here the way Boaz is handling this business deal. He's shrewd. It's not a bad thing. He's shrewd in the way he's presenting this business deal to his cousin. It's just a land deal. He's presenting it as nothing but a land deal. And who doesn't want to buy more land? If you've got the money, who doesn't want to gobble up land? He's simply presenting it as a land deal. It's not personal. You have the right to kinsman redeem this land. You are the relative. You can buy it and put it in your name. As long as it stays in the family name, we're good. But he leaves Ruth's name out of the deal altogether. Look what it says. Naomi has a piece of land to sell which belonged to her husband Elimelech. Very careful with the facts that he's keeping back. Verse 4, so I thought to inform you, saying to you, a closer relative, buy it. Buy it. Has nothing to do with the woman, nothing to do with Ruth, nothing to do with marriage. It's a land deal. So I thought to inform you, saying, buy it before those who are sitting here, before the 10 men, the witnesses, and before the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. Buy it. It can be your land. But if not, tell me that I may know, for there is no one but you to redeem it, meaning you come first, and I am after you. You have right of refusal. I have to offer it to you first. I'm an obedient Jew. Not trying to steal the land. He's doing the honorable thing by going to his relative. I am after you. And he said, the close relative, I'll do it. I will buy it. I will redeem it. But again, what has Boaz very deftly, what has he kept out of this negotiation? Ruth, the woman that you also have to take as part of this deal. So now in verse 5, having already received from the cousin, the close relative, an agreement to buy the land, I will do it. Now Boaz presents the rest of the story. Boaz says, on the day you buy the field, by the way, one more thing. It does like a good Jew would do. I love it. You can almost hear the little, by the way, there's one more thing before you leave. Little bitty inconsequential thing. Sit down a little longer. I love these people. On the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you must also, not either or, you must also acquire Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of the deceased, in order to raise up in the name of deceased on his own, in order to raise up the name of the deceased on his inheritance. You have to marry Ruth. You have to take her as a wife. You have to impregnate her. She has to have a son, and that son will acquire the land also. And to that, we'll see next time, the guy says, I'm out. Isn't it brilliant the way that Boaz is dealing with, not manipulating the situation, but letting it play out little by little, piece by piece, in an understandable way. Yes, this is a land deal. And so he presented that first, and the man said, okay, but it's also much more heavily responsible than that. You will be playing the part of a kinsman redeemer. You must raise up, in the spirit of the levirate marriage, you must raise up a son from Mahlon, the deceased, with his wife Ruth. And to that, the man said, can't do it. We'll talk about why next time. Let's close in prayer.